The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of the Preston mansion, casting golden rays across the marble floors that gleamed like mirrors. Wiped down the kitchen counter with careful precision, her dark hands moving in practiced circles as she had done for the past 15 years. At 62 years old, she had seen many things in this house, but nothing quite like what was unfolding now. Robert Preston stood at the kitchen island, his silver hair perfectly combed, his expensive suit fitting him like it was painted on. He was 70 years old but carried himself like a man 20 years younger. His fortune, built from technology patents and smart investments, was estimated at $3 billion. He smiled as she prepared his morning coffee, the same warm smile he had given her since the day she started working for him. You've been with me longer than anyone," Robert said, his voice carrying that familiar warmth. "I don't know what I'd do without you." Smiled back, but her eyes held a sadness that Robert didn't notice. She had watched him build his empire from almost nothing, had seen him through the loss of his first wife to cancer 12 years ago, and had witnessed his lonely years as a widower. She had also watched, with growing concern, as he fell head over heels for a woman 30 years his junior. Victoria entered the kitchen like a breath of expensive perfume and designer clothes. At 40 years old, she was stunning in a calculated way. Her hair fell in perfect waves, her makeup was flawless, and her body was maintained through personal trainers and careful diets. She wore a silk robe that probably cost more than earned in a month. "Good morning, darling," Victoria purred, wrapping her arms around Robert from behind. "Did you sleep well?" Robert's face lit up like a teenager in love. "Better than ever, my dear, better than ever." Turned away, focusing on slicing fruit for breakfast. She had tried to warn Robert before the wedding 6 months ago, but he wouldn't listen. Love, or whatever he thought it was, had made him blind. Victoria had appeared in Robert's life 2 years ago at a charity gala. She had been there with another wealthy man, but her eyes had locked onto Robert the moment she learned who he was. Had been there that night, helping to coordinate the event, and she had seen the predatory gleam in Victoria's eyes. It was the look of a hunter spotting prey. The courtship had been swift. Victoria knew exactly what to say, exactly how to act. She laughed at Robert's jokes, showed interest in his work, and played the role of the perfect companion. She was patient, never pushing too hard, always knowing when to pull back and when to move forward. Within a year, they were engaged. Within 18 months, they were married. Placed the fruit platter on the counter, along with Robert's coffee, black with 1 sugar, just as he liked it. She also poured a cup for Victoria, who took it without a word of thanks. "Robert, don't forget you have that meeting with the lawyers today," Victoria said, her fingers tracing patterns on his shoulder. "About updating your will." His hands froze for just a moment. This was the 3rd time this month Victoria had mentioned the will. "Yes, yes, I remember," Robert said, sipping his coffee. "Though I don't know why it's so urgent. I'm healthy as a horse." "Darling, it's just good planning," Victoria said sweetly. "We're married now. Things need to be updated properly. You know how complicated these things can be." Robert nodded, completely missing the tension in his shoulders as she cleaned the already spotless counter. After breakfast, Robert left for his office downtown. The moment his car pulled out of the driveway, Victoria's demeanor changed completely. The sweet smile vanished, replaced by cold calculation. She snapped. I need you to go to the dry cleaners today and make sure the guest rooms are prepared. We're having visitors this weekend. Yes, Mrs. Preston, replied quietly. And Victoria's voice dropped to a threatening whisper. I've noticed you watching me. I don't like it. Remember, you're just the help. Robert may have some sentimental attachment to you, but I'm his wife now. Things can change very quickly around here. Do you understand? Met her eyes steadily. I understand perfectly, Mrs. Preston. Victoria swept out of the kitchen and finally allowed herself to breathe. She had seen women like Victoria before. She had grown up poor in rural Alabama, worked her way through life cleaning houses, raising her own children alone after her husband left, and she had developed a keen sense for reading people. Victoria was dangerous, and Robert was in trouble. Over the next few weeks, watched and waited. She noticed things. Small things that individually meant nothing, but together painted a troubling picture. Victoria had started spending more time on her phone, always stepping out of rooms when calls came in. She had made several trips to the bank, which only knew about because she had overheard Victoria talking to someone, her voice tense and urgent. There were the visits from a man who came when Robert was at work, a handsome man in his 30s who Victoria introduced as her personal trainer. Though they spent their sessions in the sitting room with the door closed and never saw any exercise equipment. But what really alarmed was the medication. Robert had been prescribed new pills by a doctor had never heard of. When asked Robert about it, he had waved her off, saying Victoria had found this wonderful new specialist who was helping him with some minor health issues. I've been feeling a bit tired lately, Robert had explained. These vitamins are supposed to help. Vitamins had looked at the prescription bottle when she was cleaning the bedroom. The label had been partially torn off, but she could make out enough to know these weren't vitamins. She couldn't read the full name, but she had a bad feeling about them. Then came the day that changed everything. Arrived at the mansion early, as she always did on Thursdays. She had her own key and her own small apartment above the garage, a benefit Robert had given her years ago so she wouldn't have to commute. As she entered through the kitchen door, she heard voices from Robert's study. She shouldn't have listened. She knew it was wrong, but something in Victoria's tone made her freeze. He's taking the pills regularly, Victoria was saying. Another month, maybe 2, and we won't have to worry about him anymore. The doctor says at his age, with the dosage we're giving him, it will look completely natural. Heart failure. Happens all the time to men his age. His blood ran cold. There was a man's voice responding, but she couldn't make out the words. Don't worry about the will, Victoria continued. I've been working on him. Once it's changed, I get everything. The house, the company shares, the offshore accounts, everything. And then you and I can finally be together properly, darling. His heart pounded so hard she thought it might burst. She moved away from the door as quietly as she could, her mind racing. She had to tell Robert. She had to make him understand. But who would believe her? She was just the maid. Victoria was his wife, the woman he loved. If accused Victoria without proof, she would be fired, maybe even sued. Victoria had already threatened her once. And if Victoria really was poisoning Robert, what might she do to someone who got in her way? Spent that whole day in a state of controlled panic. She went through her duties mechanically, her mind working furiously. She needed proof. She needed evidence. But more immediately, she needed to keep Robert safe. That evening, as she prepared dinner, made a decision. She would watch Victoria like a hawk. She would test her theory. And if she was right, she would find a way to save Robert Preston, no matter the cost. Victoria came into the kitchen just as was finishing dinner preparations. She was dressed for an evening out, diamonds glittering at her throat and ears. "Robert and I are eating out tonight," Victoria announced. "You can have the evening off." "Very good, Mrs. Preston," replied. After they left, did something she had never done in 15 years of loyal service. She went into Robert's study and began to search. She looked through Victoria's things, through the medicine cabinet in the master bathroom, through the papers on Robert's desk. In Victoria's vanity drawer, hidden beneath silk scarves, found a second phone. She didn't dare turn it on, but its very existence confirmed her suspicions. In the bathroom, she found the prescription bottles. This time, she wrote down the names of the medications, carefully copying each letter. Back in her apartment, looked up the medications on her old computer. What she found made her stomach turn. These weren't vitamins. They were powerful drugs that, in the wrong combinations, could cause heart problems, especially in older patients. One article she found even mentioned how these drugs could be used to induce heart attacks that would appear natural. Didn't sleep that night. She sat in her small apartment thinking about what to do. If she went to the police, would they believe her? She had no proof that Victoria was deliberately poisoning Robert. The medications had been prescribed by a doctor. It would be her word against Victoria's. She thought about going to Robert directly, sitting him down and explaining everything. But she knew him. He was brilliant in business but naive when it came to matters of the heart. He would think she was jealous or confused or trying to cause trouble. Victoria would deny everything, would probably cry and play the victim, and Robert would believe his beautiful young wife over his aging maid. No needed to catch Victoria in the act. She needed something so clear, so undeniable, that even Robert couldn't explain it away. The opportunity came 3 days later. Was in the kitchen early in the morning preparing breakfast as usual. Robert was still upstairs getting dressed for work. Victoria was in the dining room on her phone, her voice low and urgent. Moved quietly, listening. "Yes, tonight," Victoria was saying. "He'll take his evening medication, and I'll make sure he takes a double dose. You said that should do it, right? Make it look like a heart attack in his sleep." His hands trembled as she cracked eggs into a pan. This was it. This was the proof she needed. But hearing it said so coldly, so casually, made her realize just how evil Victoria truly was. Victoria ended her call and came into the kitchen. She looked at with those cold eyes. "Make sure Robert has his morning pills with breakfast," Victoria ordered. "All of them, don't forget." "Oh yes, Mrs. Preston." set out breakfast, including the small dish with Robert's pills, just as she did every morning. Robert came down, kissed Victoria, and sat down to eat. He reached for the pills. "Don't drink it," the words burst out of before she could stop herself. Robert paused, his hand hovering over the orange juice he was about to use to wash down the pills. What? As heart raced. This was the moment. She could stay silent, keep her job, avoid trouble, or she could speak the truth and risk everything. She looked at Robert, this man who had treated her with kindness and respect for 15 years, who had paid for her daughter's college education when couldn't afford it, who had visited her in the hospital when she had pneumonia, who had always seen her as a person, not just a servant. "Mr. Preston," said, her voice steady despite her fear, "those pills are not what you think they are. And that juice, I need to have it tested. Please, sir, don't take those pills. Don't drink that juice. Your life depends on it." The room fell absolutely silent. Victoria's face had gone white, then red. Robert looked confused, then concerned. "What are you talking about?" he asked. Victoria recovered quickly. "She's lost her mind, Robert. I've noticed her acting strangely lately. Maybe she's getting dementia or something, poor dear." But stood her ground. "I heard you, Mrs. Preston. 3 days ago, I heard you on the phone talking about making his death look like a heart attack. I looked up those medications. They're not vitamins. They're drugs that can cause heart failure when combined. And I believe that juice has been tampered with." Victoria laughed, but it sounded forced. "This is insane, Robert. She's clearly having some kind of episode. We should call someone to help her." Robert looked between his wife and his maid, the two women in his life. Could see the conflict in his eyes, the struggle between what he wanted to believe and what his instincts were telling him. He said slowly, "These are very serious accusations." "I know, sir," replied, "and I know you have no reason to believe me over your wife, but I'm asking you, begging you to have those pills analyzed, have that juice tested. Look at Mrs. Preston's second phone, the one she keeps hidden in her vanity drawer. Check her call records, and ask yourself why she's been so insistent about changing your will." Victoria's face had gone pale again. "I don't have a second phone. She's making things up. Robert, please, you can't believe this nonsense." But something had shifted in Robert's expression. Perhaps it was the mention of the will, something Victoria had indeed been pushing hard on. Perhaps it was the look in his eyes, a woman who had never lied to him in 15 years. Perhaps it was simply instinct. "Victoria," he said quietly, "do you have a second phone?" "Of course not. This is ridiculous." "Then you won't mind if I check your vanity drawer." The room seemed to hold its breath. Victoria's jaw clenched, and for just a moment her mask slipped completely. Saw pure rage flash across her face. "How dare you take her word over mine?" Victoria shrieked. "I'm your wife." "Then prove her wrong," Robert said, standing up. "Show me there's no phone." Instead of leading him upstairs, Victoria did something that confirmed everything. She ran. She grabbed her purse and ran for the front door, but Robert was faster than he looked. He caught her arm. "Let me go," Victoria screamed, and in her panic she said the worst thing she could have said. You were supposed to be dead by now. You stupid old fool, you should have died weeks ago. The words hung in the air like poison. Robert released her arm, stepping back as if she had struck him. Victoria realized what she had said, her hand flying to her mouth. Robert, I didn't mean. Get out, he said, his voice cold and hard. Get out of my house. Robert Preston stood in his foyer, staring at the closed door through which his wife had just fled. His face had gone gray, and for a terrible moment thought he might collapse. She rushed to his side, guiding him gently to the nearby chair. Mr. Preston, please sit down. Let me get you some water. Not from the kitchen, he said weakly. Use the bottled water from my office. The fact that he was already thinking this way, already understanding the danger he had been in, broke's heart. She hurried to his study and returned with a sealed bottle of water, which she opened in front of him. He drank slowly, his hands shaking slightly. How long have you known? He asked finally. I suspected for a while, admitted. But I only knew for certain 3 days ago when I overheard her on the phone. Mr. Preston, I'm so sorry. I should have said something sooner. No, he said, shaking his head. You did exactly right. If you had come to me without proof, without that moment just now, I would have thought you were mistaken. Or worse, I might have thought you were jealous or confused. I'm ashamed to say it, but it's true. He looked up at her, his eyes filled with pain. She really was trying to kill me. Yes, sir, I believe she was. Robert sat in silence for a long moment. Then, with visible effort, he straightened his shoulders. Years of running a successful company had taught him how to function even in crisis. We need to call the police, he said, and my lawyer, and I need that juice tested and those pills analyzed. If what you say is true, and I believe it is, then Victoria has committed attempted murder. Over the next few hours, the mansion became a hub of controlled chaos. Police officers arrived and took statements. Crime scene technicians carefully the orange juice and the pills as evidence. Robert's personal physician came to examine him and take blood samples. His lawyer, a sharp woman named, arrived with a team of assistants. Told her story again and again to different officers. She showed them where she had found the second phone, though Victoria had taken it with her when she fled. She explained about the conversations she had overheard, the suspicious medications, the constant pressure about the will. Detective Williams, a tall man in his 50s with kind eyes, took her statement personally. He listened without interruption, taking careful notes. Mrs. Johnson, he said when she finished, you probably saved this man's life. What you did took courage. I just did what was right, said quietly. A lot of people wouldn't have, the detective replied. They would have kept quiet, not wanting to cause trouble. But you spoke up, even knowing you might lose your job or face retaliation. That takes real character. As the day wore on, the pieces started coming together. The pills were sent to a laboratory for immediate analysis. The police put out a warrant for Victoria's arrest. They checked her credit cards and found she had withdrawn the maximum amount from several ATMs before her cards were frozen. Had her team go through Robert's financial records. What they found was alarming. Over the past 6 months, Victoria had been slowly transferring money into accounts Robert hadn't monitored closely. Nothing huge, nothing that would raise immediate red flags, but altogether she had moved nearly $2 million. She was smart about it, explained to Robert as they sat in his study that evening. Small amounts from different accounts. Some were supposedly for home renovations that never happened. Others were for investment opportunities that don't seem to exist. And she convinced you to give her power of attorney over some of your accounts, didn't she? Robert nodded miserably. She said it would make managing household expenses easier. I trusted her. Of course you did, said gently. She was your wife, but Robert, we need to talk about the will situation too. She pulled out a document. This is the new will she had drawn up, the one she was pressuring you to sign. If you had signed this, everything would have gone to her. Your children would have gotten nothing. Your charitable foundations would have gotten nothing. Even would have been cut off without the retirement package you had planned for her. Robert's hands clenched into fists. I never read it carefully. She kept saying it was just standard updates because of our marriage. My God, I was such a fool. You were in love, said softly from where she stood near the door. Or you thought you were. That's not foolish, Mr. Preston, that's human. Late that evening, after the police and lawyers had finally left, Robert asked to join him in his study. She sat across from him, feeling the weight of the day settling on her shoulders. I need to apologize to you, he began. Mr. Preston, you have nothing to apologize for. Please let me finish, he said. I need to say this. When died, I thought my life was over. We had been married for 40 years. She was my partner, my best friend, my everything. When she was gone, I was lost. He paused, his voice thick with emotion. Then Victoria came along, and she made me feel alive again. She made me feel young. She said all the right things, did all the right things. And I was so desperate to feel something other than grief that I didn't see what was obvious to everyone else. Mr. Preston, you tried to warn me before the wedding, he continued. You and my children both. My son David told me I was being reckless. My daughter Sarah practically begged me to slow down, to get a prenup at least. And you tried to gently suggest that maybe I didn't know Victoria as well as I thought I did. But I wouldn't listen to any of you. I was too proud, too stubborn, too convinced that I knew better. He met her eyes. If you hadn't spoken up today, I would be dead within weeks, maybe days, and Victoria would have gotten away with it. My children would have been left with nothing, confused about why their father cut them off. You would have lost the retirement I promised you, and Victoria would have moved on to her next victim with $3 billion in her pocket. Oh, but that didn't happen, said firmly. You're safe now, that's what matters. Thanks to you, he replied. You risked everything today. Your job, your home, possibly even your safety if Victoria had been there when you spoke up. Why did you do it? Thought about her answer carefully. Mr. Preston, do you remember about 10 years ago when my daughter was applying to colleges? She got into her dream school, but I couldn't afford it. I was working 3 jobs already, and it still wasn't enough. I remember, Robert said softly. You called me into your study just like this, and you told me you were going to pay for her education. all 4 years. You said it was a bonus for my years of service, but we both knew it was more than that. You said every child deserves a chance to chase their dreams. His eyes grew misty. Law graduated top of her class. She's a doctor now, helping people every day. She has that life because of you, because you saw her potential and you saw me as more than just someone who cleaned your house. You saw us as people who mattered. She wiped her eyes. So when I realized Victoria was trying to kill you, there was no question in my mind. I couldn't let her take away a good man. I couldn't let evil win. It didn't matter if you believed me or not, or if I lost my job. I had to try to save you, just like you saved my daughter's future all those years ago. Robert's eyes were wet too. Thank you for seeing what I was too blind to see. Thank you for being brave enough to speak up. And thank you for being my friend, because that's what you are, not my employee, my friend. They sat together in companionable silence for a while, two people who had been through a traumatic day and survived it together. The next morning brought new developments. Detective Williams called early to report that they had found Victoria. She had been arrested at the airport trying to board a flight to the islands under a fake name. In her luggage, they found the second phone, over $100,000 in cash, and detailed notes about Robert's daily routines and medication schedule. The phone records were damning. Victoria had been in constant contact with a man named the supposed personal trainer, but wasn't a trainer at all. He was Victoria's boyfriend of 5 years, and he had a criminal record including fraud and attempted robbery. The scheme had been elaborate. Victoria had met at a conference for con artists, if such a thing could be believed. They had decided to target wealthy older men, specifically widowers who were vulnerable and lonely. Robert had been their third target. The first two men had become suspicious before Victoria could get to their money, but Robert, blinded by love and grief, had been easier prey. The texts between Victoria were chilling in their coldness. They discussed Robert as if he were nothing more than a bank account to be emptied. They joked about his age, mocked his attempts to be romantic, and calculated exactly how much each day of the marriage was worth in terms of the money they were stealing and the changes they were making to his will. "Listen to this," Detective Williams said, reading from his notes. "This is from a text Victoria sent 2 weeks ago. The old fool actually thinks I love him. Another month of playing the devoted wife and we'll have everything. Then we can finally get rid of him and live the life we deserve." Robert's face had gone hard as stone. "I want her prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law." "That's exactly what's going to happen, Mr. Preston," the detective assured him. "Between the attempted murder, the fraud, the theft, and conspiracy charges, she's looking at spending a very long time in prison." Over the following weeks, more details emerged. The laboratory analysis confirmed that the pills Victoria had been giving Robert were a dangerous cocktail of medications that would have indeed induced a heart attack. The orange juice that morning had been laced with additional drugs that, combined with the pills, would have been fatal within hours. The doctor who had prescribed the medications was investigated and arrested as well. He had been struck off from practicing medicine 5 years earlier for malpractice, but had continued operating illegally. providing prescriptions to criminals for the right price. He had been paid $50,000 by Victoria to provide the medications and a fake diagnosis of vitamin deficiency. Robert's children, David and Sarah, flew in immediately when they heard what had happened. They were horrified by how close they had come to losing their father, but also grateful beyond words, too. Sarah, a lawyer herself, hugged tightly. "Thank you for saving my dad. Thank you for being brave enough to speak up when no one else could." David, a businessman like his father, was more direct. "You've been part of this family for 15 years. After what you did, there's no way we can ever repay you, but we're going to try." Robert gathered his family together in the living room, including, "This experience has taught me something important," he said. "Life is short, and the people who truly matter are the ones who stand by you, who tell you the truth even when it's hard, who put you above their own comfort." He looked at, "I'm making some changes. First, I'm doubling your retirement package. Second, I'm adding you as a beneficiary in my will. You'll receive a substantial inheritance, enough to ensure you never have to worry about money again." "Mr. Preston, that's not necessary," began. "It absolutely is necessary," Robert interrupted. "And there's more. I'm setting up a scholarship fund in your name specifically for children of domestic workers who want to pursue higher education. We're calling it the Johnson Scholarship for Excellence." Couldn't speak. Tears streamed down her face as the magnitude of what he was saying sank in. "And finally," Robert continued, "I'm making you the head of my household staff with a significant raise and full benefits, including health insurance and a pension. Not because I want you to keep working until you drop, but because you've earned the recognition and the title." Sarah spoke up. "My father told us what you did, how you listened, how you investigated, how you put the pieces together. You could have been a detective. Actually, that's given me an idea." She pulled out her phone and made a call. After a brief conversation, she hung up with a smile. "I have a friend who runs a private investigation firm. She specializes in elder abuse and financial crimes against seniors. She's always looking for people with sharp eyes and good instincts. Would you be interested in consulting work, helping other families identify situations like the one you uncovered here?" Was overwhelmed. "I don't know what to say." "Say yes," Robert encouraged. "You have a gift. You see things other people miss. You care enough to act on what you see. That combination is rare and valuable. There are other people out there in situations like I was in. You could help save them." The trial, when it finally came 6 months later, was a media sensation. Victoria, as she was now known in court documents, sat stone-faced in the defendant's chair while witness after witness against her. The prosecutor laid out the scheme in detail, showing the jury exactly how Victoria had planned to murder Robert and steal his fortune. Was called to testify. She had been nervous about it, worried about speaking in front of so many people, worried about Victoria's cold eyes watching her from across the courtroom. But when she took the stand and began to tell her story, the words came easily. She described the small things she had noticed, the conversations she had overheard, the moment when she realized Robert's life was in danger. She explained why she had waited to speak up, how she had needed to be sure, how she had known no one would believe her without proof. "Why did you risk so much?" the prosecutor asked. Looked directly at the jury. "Because Mr. Preston is a good man. Because in a world where it's easy to look the other way, where it's simple to mind your own business and avoid trouble, sometimes we have to stand up for what's right. Sometimes we have to speak up for those who can't see the danger they're in. That's what I did. That's what anyone should do." The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. Victoria was found guilty on all counts: attempted murder, conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, theft, and forgery. The judge sentenced her to 35 years in prison without possibility of parole for 20 years. Who had cooperated with prosecutors in exchange for a lighter sentence, received 15 years. The corrupt doctor received 10 years and was permanently banned from ever practicing medicine again. As Victoria was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs, she locked eyes with one final time. There was no remorse there, only hatred. Met her gaze steadily until Victoria was forced to look away. The months following the trial brought unexpected changes to life. The media attention had been overwhelming at first. Reporters wanted interviews, talk shows called offering appearances, and strangers stopped her on the street to thank her or ask questions. Who had spent her entire life working quietly in the background, found herself thrust into an uncomfortable spotlight. Robert, understanding her discomfort, hired a public relations specialist to help manage the attention and protect privacy. Within a few weeks, the media storm began to die down and could return to something resembling normal life. But normal had changed forever. Sarah's friend, the private investigator named Diana, reached out to with a serious proposition. Diana ran one of the most respected investigation firms on the West Coast, specializing in cases involving vulnerable adults being exploited by caregivers, family members, or romantic partners. "I've been doing this work for 20 years, Diana explained over coffee at a quiet cafe. "And I can tell you that what you did, the way you pieced together Victoria's scheme, showed a level of insight and attention to detail that most trained investigators would envy. You saw patterns that others might have missed. You acted decisively when it mattered most." Stirred her coffee, uncertain. "I just paid attention. I cared about Mr. Preston." "Exactly," Diana said, leaning forward. "That's what makes you perfect for this work. You care. You see people as people, not as cases or paychecks. And you understand the dynamics of wealthy households because you've worked in them for years. You know how these predators operate because you've seen one up close." She pulled out a folder and slid it across the table. "I want to offer you a position as a senior consultant with my firm. You would work on cases involving potential elder abuse or exploitation. You would review situations, interview staff members, observe household dynamics, and help identify red flags. Think of it as doing what you did for Robert, but helping protect other vulnerable people before it's too late." Opened the folder and saw a contract with a salary that made her eyes widen. It was more than she had made in 5 years of working for Robert. "I can't accept this," she said, pushing the folder back. "I'm not qualified. I don't have any degrees or training." You have something better than degrees, Diana replied, pushing the folder back toward her. You have experience, instincts, and integrity. Those can't be taught. The investigative techniques can be learned, and I'll provide all the training you need. But the core of what makes you valuable, that gift you have for reading people and situations, that's innate. Thought about her conversation with Robert after the trial. He had said the same thing, that she had a gift that could help others. She thought about all the vulnerable people out there who might be in situations similar to what Robert had faced. She thought about her daughter, La, who had built a career helping people as a doctor, made possible because someone had believed in her potential. "All right," said finally. "I'll try it, but I want to keep working for Mr. Preston too, at least part-time. He's been through so much, and I don't want to abandon him." Diana smiled. "Robert already told me you'd say that. We've worked it out with him. You'll consult with us on cases 3 days a week and continue working with Robert the other days. Eventually, if this works out, you might transition fully to investigation work, but we'll take it slow." The training was intense. Diana's firm put through a 6-week crash course in investigation techniques, legal protocols, evidence documentation, and interview methods. Was the oldest person in the training group by at least 20 years, surrounded by former police officers and career investigators. She felt out of place and unsure. But as the training progressed, found that her years of experience gave her unique advantages. While the younger investigators were technically skilled, they sometimes missed the subtle signs that caught instinctively. When they practiced interviewing witnesses, a gentle, maternal approach got people to open up in ways that more aggressive questioning didn't. Her instructor, a retired FBI agent named Thomas, pulled her aside after a particularly good interview exercise. When I first heard Diana was bringing on someone with no formal training, I thought she was making a mistake," he admitted. "I'm man enough to say I was wrong. You have something special. You make people feel safe, like they can trust you. In this line of work, that's worth more than any amount of technical training." His first case came 2 months after she started with the firm. An attorney named James Mitchell had contacted Diana with concerns about his elderly uncle, a wealthy retired surgeon named Dr. Henry Mitchell. The uncle had recently married a much younger woman, and the family was worried about her intentions. "It sounds familiar, doesn't it?" Diana said as she briefed on the case. "Wealthy older man, younger wife, family concerned but no concrete evidence. This is exactly the kind of situation where your experience would be invaluable." The plan was for to be hired as a housekeeper for Dr. Mitchell's home. The position had conveniently opened up after the previous housekeeper had been suddenly fired by the new wife. Would work there for a few weeks, observe the household dynamics, and report back on what she found. Dr. Mitchell lived in a beautiful home in Pacific Heights. At 78, he was still sharp mentally but physically frail, recovering from a stroke he had suffered the year before. His wife, Amber, was 42 and had been a nurse at the rehabilitation facility where Dr. Mitchell had recovered. From her very first day, noticed troubling similarities to her experience with Victoria and Robert. Amber was overly controlling, monitoring all of Dr. Mitchell's phone calls and visitors. She had isolated him from his family, claiming they were only interested in his money. She managed all his medications personally and had convinced him to fire his previous doctor in favor of one she recommended. Worked quietly, keeping her eyes and ears open. She noticed that Amber spent a lot of time on her phone, always stepping out of the room for calls. She observed that Dr. Mitchell seemed confused and lethargic much of the time, which his family said was unusual for him despite the stroke. The breakthrough came in the second week when was cleaning the master bedroom. She found a hidden compartment in Amber's dresser containing documents. There were life insurance policies that had been taken out on Dr. Mitchell within months of the marriage, totaling $5 million. There were bank statements showing money being transferred from Dr. Mitchell's accounts to offshore accounts. And there was a new will that left everything to Amber, cutting out Dr. Mitchell's children and entirely. Carefully documented everything with her phone, just as Diana had taught her. She didn't touch anything or move anything, just photographed the evidence and returned everything exactly as she had found it. But then came an unexpected complication. That afternoon, as was preparing lunch, she overheard Amber on the phone in the next room. The conversation was eerily similar to the one she had overheard from Victoria months before. "The old fool trusts me completely," Amber was saying. "I've got him isolated from his family. They tried to visit last week, but I convinced him they were just after his money. He actually cried and thanked me for protecting him." There was a pause as the person on the other end spoke. "Don't worry about the medications," Amber continued. "I've been careful about the dosage. His doctor thinks his confusion is from the stroke, not from what I'm giving him. Another few months and we can increase the dose, make it look like complications from the stroke. Natural causes, no one will question it." Blood ran cold. This wasn't just financial exploitation. Just like Victoria, Amber was planning murder, and was potentially the only person who knew about it. She immediately texted Diana with a coded message they had arranged. Within an hour, Diana had contacted the family attorney and the police. By evening, officers arrived at the house with a warrant to search for evidence and to take Dr. Mitchell into protective custody for a medical evaluation. Amber tried to run, just as Victoria had, but this time the police were ready. She was arrested at the scene. The search of the house turned up not only the documents had found, but also a stash of medications that Dr. Mitchell's doctor confirmed he had never prescribed. Dr. Mitchell, once he was taken to the hospital and his system was cleared of the drugs Amber had been giving him, became much more alert and coherent. He was devastated to learn the truth about his wife, but grateful to be alive and to have his family back. "I was so lonely after my stroke," he told when she visited him in the hospital a week later. "My wife had died years ago, and I felt like I had become a burden to my children. When Amber showed interest in me, paid attention to me, I thought maybe I had a chance at happiness again. I was a fool." "No, Dr. Mitchell," said gently. "You were human. You were lonely and vulnerable, and someone evil took advantage of that. It's not your fault, it's hers." He took her hand. My nephew tells me you're the one who uncovered what she was doing, just like you saved that billionaire from his wife. You're making a habit of this, aren't you? Smiled, I just pay attention, Dr. Mitchell, and I believe that good people deserve to be protected from evil ones. The case made headlines, especially when reporters connected to both this case and the Victoria Preston case. The media started calling her the guardian angel housekeeper and the detective in disguise. Hated the attention, but Diana pointed out that it was actually helpful. Think about it, Diana said. How many other predators out there are going to think twice now? How many potential victims are going to be more careful? Your visibility is actually a deterrent. You're protecting people just by being known. Over the next year, worked on 6 more cases with Diana's firm. Not all of them involved murder plots, thankfully. Some were adult children exploiting elderly parents. Others were caregivers stealing medications or money. One particularly disturbing case involved a financial advisor who was systematically draining the accounts of several elderly clients. In each case, his ability to blend into households, to observe without being noticed, and to connect with people proved invaluable. She had a perfect record of identifying exploitation when it existed and clearing innocent parties when families were wrong about their suspicions. Her work with Diana's firm didn't stop her from maintaining her relationship with Robert Preston. She still spent 3 days a week at the mansion, though her role had evolved. She was less of a housekeeper now and more of a companion and household manager. She oversaw the other staff, managed the household budget, and spent time simply talking with Robert. Robert had changed after the Victoria incident. He was more cautious, more private. He had thrown himself back into his business interests and his philanthropic work. The experience had aged him in some ways, adding lines to his face and gray to his remaining hair, but it had also made him more appreciative of the genuine relationships in his life. He said one evening as they sat in his study reviewing household accounts, "Do you ever regret speaking up that day? Your life was simpler before. You could have just kept quiet, kept your job, avoided all this attention and responsibility." Thought about the question carefully. "Mr. Preston, my life before that day was good. I was comfortable. I had security, but I wasn't making a real difference. Now, every time I help identify someone being exploited, every time I help protect someone vulnerable, I know I'm doing something that matters." She smiled at him. "Besides, you taught me something important. You gave my daughter a chance when she needed it most. You showed me that people with resources and privilege have a responsibility to help those who need it. Now I'm just following your example." "I think you're giving me too much credit," Robert said with a chuckle. "But I'm proud of you, proud of what you've become, what you're doing. Would have liked you, you know. She always said that character is shown in what we do when it's hard, when it would be easier to look away." "I would have liked to meet her," said sincerely. "From everything you've told me about her, she was a remarkable woman." "She was," Robert agreed. "And she would have appreciated what you did for me. She would have loved knowing that after she was gone, there was someone watching out for me, even when I was too foolish to listen." The Johnson Scholarship Fund that Robert had established was already helping students. The first year, 3 young people, all children of domestic workers, received full scholarships too, had been invited to meet them before they started school, and the experience had moved her to tears. One of the recipients, a young woman named, had a story very similar to Loss. Her mother worked as a housekeeper for multiple families, often holding 2 or 3 jobs at once to make ends meet. Had excelled in school despite the challenges, dreaming of becoming an engineer. "Mrs. Johnson," said Shaking's hand, "my mother told me about you, about how you saved that man's life and how you're helping other people now. You're like a real-life superhero." And this 2 years after the Victoria Preston trial found herself sitting in a television studio, preparing for an interview on a national morning show. Diana sat beside her, offering moral support. The producer had reached out after his most recent case had made national headlines, and Diana had convinced that sharing her story could help protect even more people. "You're going to do great," Diana assured her. "Just speak from the heart the way you always do." The case that had brought back into the national spotlight had been her most complex yet. A wealthy tech entrepreneur named Richard Yang, worth over $800 million, had become involved with a woman who seemed perfect on the surface. Jessica was educated, sophisticated, and came from what appeared to be a good family. Unlike Victoria or Amber, Jessica wasn't rushing Richard into marriage or pushing for control of his finances. In fact, Jessica was playing the long game in a way that was far more subtle and dangerous. She had been with Richard for 3 years, slowly building trust, never asking for money or expensive gifts. She had even signed a prenuptial agreement willingly when they got engaged. To everyone, including Richard's family and friends, Jessica seemed like the real thing. But the family's attorney had noticed something odd. Despite the prenup, Richard had been making significant changes to his business structure, creating new partnerships and investment vehicles that Jessica was involved in. None of it was technically illegal or even unusual, but something about the pattern concerned him enough to call Diana's firm. Had gone in as a temporary housekeeper while Richard and Jessica's regular staff was on vacation. What she observed over 3 weeks was masterful manipulation, so subtle that even almost missed it. Jessica never directly asked for anything, but she had a way of planting ideas in Richard's mind and making him think they were his own thoughts. She would casually mention a business opportunity she had heard about, then let Richard discover it himself and suggest they invest together. She would talk about friends who had set up trusts for their partners, then wait for Richard to suggest doing the same for her. The real breakthrough came when overheard a conversation between Jessica and someone she introduced as her brother. They were in the garden, speaking in Mandarin, which they assumed the African-American housekeeper wouldn't understand. But's daughter-in-law had married a Chinese-American man and had learned basic Mandarin to communicate with her. What she heard made her blood run cold. Jessica and her brother, who was actually her boyfriend from before she met Richard, were discussing their timeline. They had planned everything meticulously. The prenup didn't matter because they had found ways around it through the business partnerships. They had calculated that in another year they would have positioned themselves to control enough of Richard's assets through legitimate-seeming business arrangements that they could push him out of his own company. "The beauty of it," Jessica had said in Mandarin, "is that it's all legal. We're not stealing anything. We're not poisoning anyone. We're just smarter than he is. By the time he realizes what's happening, it will be too late. The contracts are ironclad." Had recorded the conversation on her phone and immediately reported it to Diana. The investigation that followed revealed an elaborate scheme. Jessica and her partner had done this before, targeting wealthy men in the tech industry. They would research potential targets extensively, create false backgrounds that would appeal to those specific men, and then execute long-term plans to gain control of business assets through seemingly legitimate means. In Richard's case, they had been setting up partnerships and investment vehicles that would eventually give them control of significant portions of his company's stock and intellectual property. The prenup protected his personal assets in case of divorce, but the business arrangements they had convinced him to make would have given them control of his company's future earnings and decision-making power. The revelation had shocked Richard and his family. The case had gone to court not for criminal charges, but for civil litigation to unwind the business arrangements and prove fraud. Had about what she had witnessed and heard. Jessica and her partner were ultimately convicted of fraud and conspiracy, sentenced to significant prison time, and ordered to pay restitution. Now sitting in the television studio, prepared to share the story with millions of viewers. The host, a well-known journalist named Clark, greeted her warmly as the cameras started rolling. "Johnson, you've been called the guardian angel, the detective housekeeper, and various other names by the media," began. "But I think most people watching right now want to know, how did a woman who spent most of her life cleaning houses become one of the most effective investigators of elder fraud and exploitation in the country?" Smiled, feeling more comfortable now that the interview had begun. "I never set out to be an investigator. I just paid attention to the people I worked for. I cared about them. And when I saw something wrong, I couldn't stay silent." "Let's talk about that first case, the one with Robert Preston and his wife Victoria," said. "That must have been terrifying, confronting a woman who was literally trying to murder someone." "It was," admitted. "But what was more terrifying was the thought of staying silent and watching a good man die when I could have prevented it. Mr. Preston had been kind to me for 15 years. He paid for my daughter's education. He treated me with respect and dignity. When I realized what Victoria was doing, there was no question in my mind. I had to speak up." "But you risked everything," pressed. "Your job, your home, potentially even your safety. How did you find the courage?" Thought about her answer. "I think courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing what's right even when you're afraid. I was raised by a mother who worked as a maid her whole life, just like I did. She used to tell me that our job wasn't just to clean houses. It was to care for the people who lived in those houses, to be eyes and ears for those who couldn't see everything happening around them." She continued, "When you work in someone's home, you become part of the family in a way. You see them at their most vulnerable. You know their routines, their habits, their weaknesses. That's a position of trust. And with that trust comes responsibility. I couldn't betray Mr. Preston's trust by staying silent when I knew someone was trying to harm him. Leaned forward. Since that first case, you've worked on dozens of investigations. You've uncovered fraud, abuse, theft, and even additional murder plots. What patterns do you see in these cases? The biggest pattern is isolation, said thoughtfully. Whether it's a romantic partner like Victoria or Jessica, or a caregiver, or even sometimes a family member, they all start by isolating the victim. They cut them off from friends, from other family, from anyone who might notice what's happening. She ticked off points on her fingers. They control information. They manage phone calls, emails, visitors. They present themselves as the only person who truly cares, who truly understands. They make the victim dependent on them emotionally and often physically. Once that isolation is complete, they can do whatever they want because there's no one around to notice or intervene. What can people do to protect themselves or their loved ones? Asked. Stay connected, said firmly. That's the most important thing. If you have an elderly parent or relative, stay in regular contact. Not just phone calls, but actual visits. Video calls where you can see them and their surroundings. Pay attention if someone is suddenly limiting access to your loved one. She continued, and if you're someone who has experienced loss, who's feeling lonely, please be careful about people who seem too good to be true. Victoria, Amber, Jessica, they all presented themselves as perfect partners. They said all the right things, did all the right things. But real relationships develop naturally over time. Be suspicious of anyone who's pushing too hard, too fast, or trying to isolate you from people who care about you. Let's talk about something else, said. You're a black woman who has spent your life working in wealthy, predominantly white households. Have you faced discrimination or prejudice in your work? Paused, considering her answer carefully. Of course I have. There were houses where I was treated as invisible, where people talked about sensitive matters in front of me as if I wasn't there or couldn't understand. There were times when I was automatically suspected when something went missing, even though I had never stolen anything in my life. There were families who wouldn't let me eat at the same table or use the same bathroom as them. But, she continued, there were also families like the Prestons who treated me with respect and dignity, who saw me as a person, not just as hired help. And ironically, being underestimated has been an advantage in my investigation work. Victoria never suspected that the black maid was paying attention, was capable of understanding what she was doing, was smart enough to put the pieces together. People like her see what they expect to see, and they don't expect much from someone who looks like me. So you've turned prejudice into a tool? Asked. I've turned it into awareness, corrected. I'm aware that people underestimate me. I'm aware that I can move through certain spaces without being truly seen. And I use that awareness to protect people who need protection. If people want to underestimate me, that's their choice. But they usually regret it. The interview continued for another 20 minutes, with asking about specific cases and philosophy on her work. Toward the end, brought up the scholarship fund. The Johnson Scholarship has now helped over 20 students attend top universities, said. How does it feel to know that your actions that day Speaking up to save Robert Preston has created this ripple effect of positive change. His eyes grew misty. It's overwhelming sometimes. Those students, they're going to do amazing things with their lives. They're going to become doctors, engineers, teachers, leaders. And some of them are going to help other people the way I've tried to help people. That's the real legacy, not the cases I've solved or the money I've helped recover. It's the lives that have been changed and improved because I spoke up that one morning. After the interview, as and Diana left the studio, Diana put her arm around's shoulders. "You were perfect in there," Diana said. "Honest, thoughtful, humble, but confident. You're going to inspire a lot of people." "I hope so," said. "I hope I inspire people to pay attention to the vulnerable people in their lives, to speak up when they see something wrong, to not assume that someone else will handle it." Back at Robert Preston's mansion that evening, found him watching the recorded interview. He smiled when she entered his study. "You were wonderful," he said. "Absolutely wonderful. You've come so far from that day when you could barely bring yourself to tell me not to drink that juice." "I've had good teachers," replied, settling into her usual chair. "You taught me that it's okay to use my voice even when I'm scared. Diana taught me how to channel my instincts into effective investigation. And life taught me that staying silent in the face of evil is its own kind of wrong." Robert nodded thoughtfully. "I've been thinking about something. I'm 72 now. I'm still in good health, thank God and thanks to you, but I won't live forever. I want to make sure that the work you're doing, the work we've started together, continues long after I'm gone." He pulled out a folder. "I've been working with my attorneys and with Diana. We're establishing the Johnson Foundation for Elder Protection. It will fund investigations into suspected abuse, provide legal support for victims, and offer training for people who want to do the kind of work you do." Was speechless. "The foundation will be funded with an initial endowment of $50 million, Robert continued. "And it will continue to receive funding from my estate in perpetuity. Diana has agreed to serve as the executive director, and you will be the chairman of the board." Robert, I don't know what to say, managed. "Say you'll do it," Robert replied. "Say you'll take this gift you have and help build something that will protect vulnerable people for generations to come. Say you'll let your story inspire others to pay attention, to care, to speak up." Thought about her mother, who had cleaned houses her whole life and taught to do the same. She thought about her daughter La, now a successful doctor helping people every day. She thought about all the students who had received scholarships, all the victims she had helped protect, all the families she had kept intact by identifying predators before they could do irreparable harm. "Yes," she said finally. "Yes, I'll do it." The Johnson Foundation launched 6 months later with a gala event that brought together law enforcement officials, attorneys specializing in elder law, social workers, and families who had been helped by SWORK. The evening was a celebration of justice and protection, of speaking truth to power, of refusing to let the vulnerable be exploited. During her speech at the gala, looked out at the crowd and felt the weight of responsibility and opportunity. "Many people have asked me how I found the courage to speak up that day when I told Mr. Preston not to drink that juice," she began. The truth is, it wasn't really courage. It was love. Love for a man who had shown me kindness, love for justice, love for truth, and love for the idea that we all have a responsibility to protect each other. She continued, "This foundation represents that love in action. It represents the belief that no one should be exploited simply because they're old or lonely or vulnerable. It represents the commitment that there will always be someone paying attention, someone who cares enough to speak up, someone who will stand between predators and their prey. But most importantly," said her voice strong and clear, "it represents hope. Hope that we can build a society where the vulnerable are protected, where the voiceless have advocates, where evil doesn't go unchallenged. That's the world I want to help create. That's the legacy I want to leave. And with your help, with the support of people who believe in this mission, we can make it happen." The applause was thunderous. As stepped away from the podium, she caught Robert's eye across the room. He was standing with his children, David and Sarah, all of them beaming with pride. He raised his glass to her in a silent toast, and she nodded back, understanding flowing between them without words. Later that night, as the gala wound down and guests began to leave, found herself on the mansion's terrace looking out at the city lights. Diana joined her, 2 glasses of champagne in hand. "Quite a journey from that morning in the kitchen," Diana observed, handing a glass. "Quite a journey indeed," agreed. "Sometimes I still can't believe this is my life now, that I went from being invisible to being someone who speaks at galas and runs a foundation." "You were never invisible," Diana said gently. "You were always this person. You just needed the opportunity to show the world what you've always been capable of." Smiled, maybe. Or maybe we all have capabilities we don't know about until we're tested, until we're faced with a choice between staying silent and speaking up, between looking away and standing firm, between comfort and courage. "That's beautiful," Diana said. "You should write that down. Maybe write a book about your experiences. A lot of people could benefit from hearing your story in your own words." Laughed. "A book? Diana, I'm still getting used to giving interviews. I don't know about writing a whole book." "Think about it," Diana urged. "Your story is powerful. The lessons you've learned could help so many people. Not just people in your position, but anyone who has ever felt powerless, anyone who has wondered if their voice matters." As they stood together in comfortable silence, reflected on how far she had come. From a maid who almost stayed silent to a woman who had found her voice and used it to change lives. From someone who cleaned houses to someone who cleaned up injustice. From invisible to influential. But at her core, she was still the same person. Still the woman who cared about people, who paid attention to details, who believed in doing right even when it was hard. The circumstances had changed. 5 years after Swarning saved Robert Preston's life, the foundation bearing her name had become one of the most effective organizations in the country for combating elder exploitation. The small team had grown to include investigators, attorneys, social workers, and advocates, all working together to protect vulnerable people from predators. Walked through the Foundation's headquarters, a modern building in downtown San Francisco that Robert had purchased and renovated specifically for this purpose. The walls were decorated with thank you letters from families they had helped, photos of successful cases, and reminders of why the work mattered. At 67 years old, moved with purpose and confidence, very different from the uncertain woman who had nervously confronted Victoria 5 years ago. Her assistant, a young woman named, hurried to catch up with her. "Mrs. Johnson, you have that meeting with the California State Senate Committee in an hour. They want to discuss the elder protection legislation you proposed." Nodded, reviewing the papers in her hand. The foundation had drafted legislation that would strengthen penalties for elder exploitation, mandate training for financial institutions to identify suspicious activity involving elderly clients, and create a statewide database to track complaints and patterns. Getting it passed would be a major victory. "Is Diana ready?" asked. "She's in the conference room going over the presentation," replied. "Oh, and Mr. Preston called. He wanted to remind you about dinner tonight. He said to tell you he's cooking." Smiled. Robert had taken up cooking as a hobby after his experience with Victoria, finding it therapeutic and enjoying the creativity it allowed. He wasn't particularly good at it, but he was enthusiastic and appreciated the gesture. Before heading to the state capitol, stopped by her office to review her notes one more time. The walls of her office told the story of her journey. There was a framed photo of her with Robert the day the foundation launched. Another of her receiving an award from the National Association of Elder Law Attorneys. A picture of her with the first class of scholarship recipients. And prominently displayed a photo of her daughter lie at her medical school graduation, the moment that had started everything. Her phone buzzed with a text from her son, whom she hadn't mentioned much in the story so far because he had been living overseas for work. He had returned to the States 6 months ago and was now working with the Foundation's legal team. "Mom just finished depositions in the Henderson case. I think we've got them dead to rights. You were right about the caregiver. Love you." Felt a surge of pride. Both her children were now working in fields that helped people. As a doctor, as an attorney specializing in elder law. The ripple effects of Robert's generosity and her own courage kept spreading. The meeting at the state capitol went well. Had learned how to navigate political spaces, how to present evidence and arguments in ways that resonated with legislators. She spoke about specific cases without naming names, painted pictures of vulnerable people being exploited, and made clear the inadequacy of current laws to address the growing problem of elder fraud. Senator Martinez, who had invited to testify, was particularly supportive. "Mrs. Johnson, your foundation has documented over 300 cases of elder exploitation in California alone in the past 5 years. You've recovered over $200 million for victims and their families. You've put dozens of predators in prison. The work you're doing is exactly why we need these laws." After several hours of testimony and discussion, the committee voted unanimously to move the legislation forward. It was a significant victory, though knew the battle wasn't over. The bill still had to pass both houses and be signed by the governor, but it was progress. Driving back to the foundation's headquarters, reflected on how much had changed. not just in her own life but in public awareness of elder exploitation. When she had first saved Robert, few people understood how common these schemes were. Now, thanks to her work and the media attention it had generated, the issue was taken seriously. Banks had implemented new protocols for monitoring accounts of elderly customers. Law enforcement had created specialized units to investigate elder fraud. Families were more aware of warning signs, and predators knew that their actions were more likely to be detected and punished. But there was still so much work to do. Back at her office, found an urgent message from Diana. A new case had come in that required immediate attention. Read through the details and felt her stomach tighten with familiar anger. An 85-year-old woman named had contacted the foundation after discovering that her live-in caregiver had been systematically stealing from her for over 2 years. The caregiver had forged checks, used credit cards, and convinced to sign over power of attorney. The family had noticed their mother's accounts were being drained, but had defended the caregiver, saying she was the only person who really cared. It was a classic case of exploitation paired with emotional manipulation. The predator had isolated from her family, convinced her that her children were only interested in her money, and positioned herself as the only trustworthy person in life. Diana entered the office with a strategy. We need to move fast on this one. The caregiver is already planning to disappear. We have sources that say she's preparing to flee to the Philippines where she has family. If she gets out of the country, we may never recover the money or get justice for her. Well, what do we need? Asked. Evidence that will stand up in court, Diana replied. We have financial records showing the theft, but we need to prove that was mentally compromised when she signed the power of attorney. We need medical evaluations, witness testimony, and ideally, we need to catch the caregiver in the act of trying to steal more. Made a decision. I'll go in as a visiting nurse to do a wellness check. It's something the family can request, and it will give me a chance to evaluate's condition and observe the caregiver. If she's as manipulative as the family says, she'll reveal herself. Are you sure? Diana asked with concern. We have younger investigators who could do this. I'm sure, said firmly. Is 85, I'm 67. We're closer in age and experience than most of your investigators. She'll relate to me better. And I've dealt with these predators before. I know what to look for. 2 days later, arrived at home in a suburb of Sacramento. She was dressed in scrubs and carried a medical bag, playing the role of a nurse sent by an insurance company for a routine wellness evaluation. The caregiver who answered the door was a woman in her 40s named. She was pleasant and professional at first, but noticed the calculating look in her eyes, the way she assessed as a potential threat. I wasn't told about any wellness check, said, blocking the doorway. It's standard procedure for all clients over 80, replied smoothly, showing identification from a legitimate home health agency that was cooperating with the investigation. I just need to do a quick evaluation to make sure Mrs. needs are being met appropriately. Reluctantly let her in. Inside, found sitting in a chair by the window, looking frail and confused. The house was clean but sterile, lacking the personal touches and family photos that usually filled homes of people's age. "Mrs. My name is," she said gently, kneeling beside's chair. "I'm here to check on you and make sure you're doing okay. Is that all right?" Looked at nervously before nodding. That one look told everything she needed to know. Was afraid of her caregiver. Over the next hour, conducted a thorough evaluation, asking questions about's daily routine, her medications, her diet, her activities. She also asked about's family and watched as interrupted constantly, offering answers before could speak, correcting things said, and maintaining control of the conversation. During a moment when left the room to get's medication list, leaned close to, "Mrs., are you happy here?" she asked quietly. His eyes filled with tears. "I want to see my children," she whispered, "but says they don't care about me. She says they're just waiting for me to die so they can have my money, but I miss them so much." "What if I told you that's not true?" said. "What if I told you your children have been desperately trying to see you, but has been keeping them away?" Looked confused and frightened. "Takes care of me. She says she's the only one who really loves me." "Mrs., people who really love you don't keep you away from your family," said gently. "They don't control who you see or talk to, and they definitely don't take money from your accounts without permission." His eyes widened. "What do you mean?" Before could answer, returned. She looked suspicious, noticing the intensity of the conversation. "Is everything okay?" asked, her voice tight. "Everything's fine," said, standing up. "I was just finishing my evaluation." But wasn't fooled. "I think you should leave now. Mrs. needs her rest." "I'll need to come back tomorrow to complete the evaluation," said calmly. "It's a 2-day process for clients at Mrs. age." "That won't be necessary," said firmly, moving toward the door. Knew she was out of time. If suspected she was onto the scheme, she might accelerate her plans to flee or, worse, do something to cover her tracks. As she walked to her car, called Diana. "We need to move now. Get the police and the family ready. I'm going to go back in." "You wait for backup," Diana urged. "There's no time," replied. "I saw fear in that woman's eyes. If is in danger, every minute counts." Returned to the house and knocked firmly on the door. When answered, didn't wait for permission. She pushed past her into the house. "Mrs., I need you to listen to me very carefully," said loudly. "Has been stealing from you. She has taken hundreds of thousands of dollars from your accounts. She has been lying to you about your family, and she is not your friend." This pleasant mask dropped completely. "Get out of this house right now, or I'm calling the police." "Please do," said, "because they're already on their way, and so is family." His face went white, then red with rage. "You have no right to come in here and make these accusations. I have power of attorney. I make decisions for." "Power of attorney obtained through fraud and manipulation," said calmly. "And I have evidence. Bank records showing the theft, forged checks with your handwriting, credit card statements for purchases you made, and testimony from doctors that she was mentally compromised when you convinced her to sign those documents." Was crying now, confusion and realization dawning on her face. "Is this true? Did you steal from me? Ignored her, focused on, who are you really? You're not a nurse. No, said, I'm someone who stops people like you. My name is Johnson, and I run the Elder Protection Foundation. We've been investigating you for 2 weeks. Your scheme is over. Made a move toward a bag near the door, but anticipated it. Don't, she said firmly. Whatever you're thinking of doing, it will only make things worse. The sirens sounded in the distance, getting closer. Shoulders slumped as she realized escape was impossible. She sank into a chair, her face in her hands. The police arrived, along with children who rushed to their mother's side. There were tears and embraces, apologies and explanations. Once she understood what had been done to her, was heartbroken but also relieved to have her family back. Was arrested and charged with theft, elder abuse, forgery, and fraud. The investigation uncovered that she had stolen over $400,000 from over 2 years. She had done it before to other elderly clients, moving from victim to victim before anyone caught on. The case made headlines, adding another chapter to s growing reputation. But for the real victory was watching reunited with her family, seeing the joy and relief on everyone's faces, knowing that another predator had been stopped. That evening kept her dinner appointment with Robert. He had indeed attempted to cook with mixed results. The pasta was overcooked, the sauce was from a jar, and the salad was mostly just lettuce. But they ate it together in his kitchen, laughing about his culinary limitations and talking about the day's events. You took a risk going back into that house, Robert said with concern. What if had been violent? Then I would have dealt with it, replied simply. Robert, I've faced down murderers and thieves. I've been threatened, intimidated, and insulted. But I can't let fear stop me from doing what's right. You taught me that. I taught you that? Robert asked, surprised. You did, confirmed. When you paid for loss education, you took a risk. You didn't have to do that. You could have just paid me a salary and left it at that. But you saw an opportunity to change someone's life, and you took it, even though there was no guarantee it would work out. She continued, That's what I'm doing now. I see opportunities to protect people, to stop evil, to make things right. And I take those opportunities, even when they're scary or risky, because that's what you taught me to do. That's what good people do. Robert smiled, his eyes misty. Would have loved you. She always said that the measure of a person's character is what they do when no one is watching, when there's no reward except knowing you did the right thing. I think I would have loved her too, said warmly. They finished dinner and moved to Robert's study, their comfortable routine. Updated him on the Foundation's progress, the legislation moving through the state Senate, the new cases they were working on. Robert shared news about his company, his children, and his ongoing philanthropic projects. I've been thinking about expanding the scholarship fund, Robert said. We've focused on children of domestic workers, which is wonderful. But I want to create a second program specifically for people like you. Adults who are changing careers later in life, who have discovered talents and passions they didn't know they had. People who want to go back to school or get training in new fields. Was touched. That's a beautiful idea, Robert. It's inspired by you, he said. You reinvented yourself in your 60s. You went from being a housekeeper to being an investigator, a foundation director, a public speaker, an advocate for change. If you can do it, think how many other people out there could do the same if they just had support and opportunity. "Count me in," said, "let's make it happen." As the evening wound down and prepared to head back to her own home, which she had purchased 2 years ago with her salary from the foundation and her inheritance from Robert's revised will, Robert stopped her at the door. "I need to tell you something," he said seriously. "I'm getting older. I'm 77 now. I'm in good health, thanks to you and good medical care, but I won't live forever. When I'm gone, I want you to know that everything we've built together, the foundation, the scholarships, all of it, will continue. It's all endowed in perpetuity. Your work will go on long after both of us are gone." Hugged him this man who had been her employer, then her friend, and now was like family to her. "We've done good work together, Robert. We've changed lives. That's something to be proud of." "We have," he agreed. "And it all started because you had the courage to say 4 words. Don't drink it. 4 words that saved my life and changed everything." Over the next several months, the elder protection legislation passed both houses of the California legislature and was signed into law by the governor. It was nicknamed "Slaw" by the media, though had tried to discourage that. The law became a model for other states, with several states introducing similar legislation. The foundation continued to grow, handling more cases, training more investigators, and reaching more families. Divided her time between investigating cases, managing the foundation, speaking at conferences and events, and mentoring young people who wanted to enter the field of elder protection. Her daughter-in-law had her second child, a little girl they named after Robert's late wife. It was a gesture of respect and gratitude that moved both Robert and deeply. When Robert held baby for the first time, saw tears running down his cheeks. "Life is strange," he said softly, looking at the baby. "5 years ago, I was being poisoned by someone I thought loved me. I was isolated, manipulated, close to death. Now here I am, holding my employee's granddaughter, who was named after my late wife, and I've never felt more blessed or more grateful." "That's what happens when you choose love over hate, truth over deception, courage over fear," said. "Good things grow." A son successfully prosecuted the caregiver and several other major cases. He was becoming known as one of the top elder abuse prosecutors in the state. He often credited his mother's example for inspiring his career choice. On the 5-year anniversary of the day had warned Robert about the poisoned juice, the foundation held a special event. They called it the Speak Up Celebration, encouraging people to share stories of times when they had spoken up to protect someone, to fight injustice, or to make a difference. Hundreds of people attended. There were families who had been helped by the foundation. There were investigators and attorneys who had learned from methods. There were students who had received scholarships. There were legislators who had worked on protective legislation. And there were ordinary people who had been inspired by story to pay more attention to the vulnerable people in their own lives. Robert spoke at the event, his voice strong and clear despite his age. "5 years ago, Johnson saved my life with 4 words. But those 4 words represented 15 years of paying attention, of caring, of building trust. They represented a lifetime of character and integrity. And they represented a choice to speak up even when it was frightening and risky. He continued, "We're here today not just to celebrate, though she certainly deserves celebration. We're here to celebrate the power of speaking up, of refusing to stay silent in the face of wrong, of choosing courage over comfort. We're here to encourage each other to be people who pay attention, who care, and who act when action is needed." When it was turn to speak, she stood before the crowd feeling the weight of responsibility and the lightness of gratitude. "When I was a young girl in Alabama," she began, "my mother used to clean houses for wealthy families. I would sometimes go with her during school breaks. I remember watching her work, how carefully she did everything, how much pride she took in her job even though it was hard and often thankless." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "One day I asked her why she cared so much about doing a good job when most of the people she worked for barely noticed her. She told me something I've never forgotten. She said, 'Baby girl, it doesn't matter if they notice me or not. I notice me. God notices me. And I have to be able to look at myself in the mirror and know I did right.'" His voice grew stronger. "That's what I think about when people call me brave or heroic for speaking up about Victoria. I wasn't being brave or heroic. I was just doing what my mama taught me to do. I was noticing someone who needed help. I was caring enough to act. And I was making sure that when I looked in the mirror, I could know I did right." She looked around at the crowd. Every single person in this room has the power to make a difference in someone's life. You don't need a foundation or a fancy title or media attention. You just need to pay attention to the people around you, care about them. And when you see something wrong, speak up. Say something, do something. Don't assume someone else will handle it. Be the someone who handles it. This foundation, this work, all of it started because I chose to speak up instead of staying silent. I chose action over comfort. I chose courage over fear, and look what grew from that choice. Lives saved, families reunited, justice served, futures protected. That's the power of speaking up. That's what happens when good people refuse to let evil win. The applause was thunderous and long. Stood there, accepting it with grace and humility, knowing that this was bigger than her. It was about a movement, a change in how society viewed and protected its most vulnerable members. After the event, as people were leaving and saying their goodbyes, a young woman approached. She was in her 20s, neatly dressed, carrying herself with quiet confidence. "Mrs. Johnson, my name is," she said. "I'm a housekeeper for a family in county. I wanted to thank you for what you've done. You've shown people like me that we matter, that our voices count, that we can make a difference." "Of course you matter, dear," said warmly. "Every person matters." "I know that now," replied. "But I didn't always. I'm from Ethiopia. I came here 5 years ago as a domestic worker. For a long time, I felt invisible. People talked around me like I wasn't there. They never asked my opinion or really saw me as a person. But your story changed that for me." She continued, her eyes bright with emotion. "Last month, I noticed that the elderly grandmother in the house where I work was being mistreated by her visiting nephew. He was taking money from her purse and being verbally abusive. Before hearing your story, I probably would have stayed quiet. It wasn't my business. I'm just the help. But I thought about what you did, about how you spoke up even though it was scary, so I reported it to her daughter. Smiled. The nephew was confronted and banned from the house. The grandmother is safe now. And her daughter thanked me, really thanked me for caring enough to say something. She said I was part of the family, not just an employee. That meant everything to me. Hugged tears in her eyes. That's what this is all about. Thank you for having the courage to speak up. You saved that woman just like I saved Robert. You're a hero, too. As the last guests left and the event space emptied, found herself alone with Robert and Diana, the three people who had been on this journey together from the beginning. 5 years, Diana mused. Feels like both yesterday and a lifetime ago. We've accomplished a lot, Robert said, but there's still so much to do. There always will be, replied. As long as there are vulnerable people and predators who target them, there will be work to do. But now there are more people doing that work. More people paying attention. More people speaking up. That's the real victory. She looked at her two friends, the white billionaire who had been saved by his black maid, and the Latina investigator who had helped turn that salvation into a movement for change. We make a good team, said with a smile. Different backgrounds, different experiences, but united in purpose. That's how it should be. That's how we change the world. As they walked out of the venue together into the warm evening air, thought about how far she had come. From a maid who was almost invisible to a woman whose voice carried weight and authority. From someone who cleaned houses to someone who cleaned up corruption and protected the innocent. But underneath all the changes, she was still the same person. Still the woman who believed in doing right, who cared about people, who refused to stay silent in the face of evil. The woman her mother had raised her to be. And as she drove home that night, past the city lights and toward the modest house she had bought with her own money, Johnson felt something she hadn't felt in a very long time. She felt complete. She felt purposeful. She felt like all the struggles and hardships of her life had been leading to this moment, this work, this calling. She thought of the words she would write later that night in the journal she had started keeping at Diana's suggestion. Words that would eventually become the first chapter of her autobiography, sharing her story with the world. Life doesn't always turn out the way we plan. Sometimes it turns out better. Sometimes our greatest trials become our greatest triumphs. Sometimes the smallest voice speaks the loudest truth. And sometimes 4 simple words, "Don't drink it," can change everything. My name is Johnson, and this is my story of speaking up, standing firm and refusing to let evil win. The entity, her character, remained constant. And that realized was the real lesson of her journey. It wasn't about becoming someone new. It was about having the courage to be fully yourself, to trust your instincts, to act on your values even when it's frightening or uncomfortable. It was about recognizing that every person, regardless of their station in life, has something valuable to offer the world. It's going to change my whole life. I don't know how to thank you. You thank me by working hard, by chasing your dreams, and by helping others when you can, replied. That's all any of us can do. Take the opportunities we're given and use them to make the world a little better. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed around Robert, and Robert made a brief statement thanking the police, the prosecutors, and especially for her courage and dedication. Victoria looked at him, then and whatever she saw in their faces made her turn and run. The front door slammed behind her.